and welcome to Mel Make Stuff. My name is Melissa and this is my January 2021 podcast. If you saw the podcast I put out last month about all of my works in progress, you'll know that I had a ton of things that I was hoping to get a lot of work done at the beginning of 2021. So I'm happy to say that I have finished 3 things. I have done a lot of work on some others, and I've started to plan a little bit ahead as far as what I would like to knit next. So let me tell you about what I've been doing. My first finished object is what I'm wearing. This is the Sunset Dunes by Yumiko Alexander. And if you saw that last video, you'll know that I barely had any work to do on this, so this isn't really like that much of an accomplishment between a couple weeks ago and today. But what I had to do from the last time was sew the sleeves in. And so I have done that. It was not without issue, but it's done now and it looks okay. All the pieces of this garment are worked from the bottom up. So you start at the hem and you work up, and then you knit the sleeves separately, and you also start at the bottom of the sleeves and work up. So what I had ended up with was the body, which was knit in the round. The shoulders had been seamed, so there was an armhole, like a full circle armhole. And then I had some flat sleeves. And so the pattern instructions simply say, set in the sleeves. And I was like, cool, I got this. The times that I've had to set in sleeves when I've been sewing a garment, and it's like you sew the entire sleeve together first, in those instances, you set like the round sleeve into the round body hole. The first thing that I did was sew up the sleeves at the underarm seam. It's just this really short little tiny seam here. And then I pinned the pieces together. So I pinned like the top and the bottom of the sleeve into the body. And then I used mattress stitch to sew them together from the right side. I was using the same yarn to seam the sleeve as I had used for the body. And this stuff is like very delicate. It's got like a real nubbly texture, and it's also delicate. So this was just not the best choice. Like I should have chosen a different yarn to seam this thing. But whatever, I had gotten to this point on the sleeve, and then it was looking like it wasn't lined up quite right. I had more fabric on the body than I had on the sleeve, and I needed to like fit those pieces together. And so ordinarily I would unpick the seam a little bit and just ease it in so that it's more of a gradual transition. And so I tried to do that, but with this yarn, it was too sticky to unpick the seam. So I ended up just having to keep going. Like I could have broken the yarn and completely taken the entire thing apart, but like it was fine up until a certain point, and then it started to not become so fine. So I considered what to do, and I looked at it for a little while, and I was thinking, you know, this will probably block out. And if it doesn't, then I'll just take it off at that point and completely redo the sleeve set in. So luckily it did block out, but the thing that I would do differently next time I'm working with this yarn is if I'm doing anything seamed, I would definitely use like a smooth sock yarn to seam. I wouldn't screw around trying to seam with this stuff ever again. Here's a full body shot of what this looks like on. Obviously, the most distinctive part of this garment is this weird asymmetrical hem, which is made when you fold the fabric up on the side and you make these welts on the right side of your body as you're wearing it, and it pulls that side of the hem up. So there's no short rows or anything in the body that are creating this odd shaping. It's all done because the fabric is basically hiked up on one side. I hadn't ever seen that used in that way before. Like I had seen welts before in knitting patterns, but I had never seen the welts used to shape the hem, which I thought was really interesting. Other things that I liked about this pattern are the finishing details, which you do as you go pretty much. So the folded hem at the bottom, the folded hem at the sleeves, and also the folded neckline, which you do by picking up stitches at the end, knitting for some amount of time, and then folding under, and you actually sew it to the pickup edge of the neckline. So it is a really smooth way to finish the project, and I really like that detail. So that is the Sunset Dunes. I am so pumped with how this turned out. I made a ton of modifications to this pattern, which is by Marie Wallin. It's the Yell sweater out of her Shetland book. The last time I talked to you, I think I was about here on the body, and it's knitted from the bottom up, so I had to keep going on up, and then none of this front band was there at all. I really got a ton of work done on this, and I don't know how that happened exactly, because this is a super labor-intensive project, And I also started making a lot of modifications right in the middle of the process that should probably have taken longer, but I don't know. Maybe I was just so excited about it that I got it done really quickly. So let me talk you through some of the modifications that I did. Obviously, I didn't put the sleeves on. That was sort of modification number one. And I wasn't really planning on changing the pattern a whole lot after that. I knew I would have to figure out some way to finish the sleeve openings if I wasn't going to put sleeves in there, but I didn't think too much would change other than that. I had already decided to do a folded hem because I could tell from Ravelry pictures that there are little, very short bands of moss stitch both on the front band and also at the bottom of the hem. And I could tell from pictures on Ravelry of other people's finished projects that those were not going to stay flat. They were going to be curling up all the time, and that sort of thing really annoys me. So I knew I was going to have to figure out some sort of solution for that. At the bottom of the sweater, I decided up front to do a folded hem. So I had been planning on that from the beginning. I guess that was sort of the original modification I made. So after I talked to you about this project the last time, I had to have my first experience with knitting colorwork flat, doing the shoulder shaping for this. It's really gradual and hard to tell, but there is about, I don't know, an inch of shoulder shaping that goes on. So once you get to this point, you have to start knitting this flat back and forth in pattern. And I found that to be so annoying. Like, it wasn't even hard, it was just annoying. I do not like knitting colorwork flat, as I discovered. This cat is just interrupting everything. Long story short, I don't like purling in colorwork. So after I had gotten done with the shoulder shaping, I ended up making another modification up here. So instead of binding off for the shoulder shaping, I did short rows instead because I wanted to do a 3-needle bind off for the shoulders. I ended up knitting a facing for the entire front band because not only did I want this moss stitch to lay flat, I also had to cover up the steek that was at the bottom front right along here. It was such an elegant solution. I am so pleased with it. And then I got carried away. So let me show you the facing first. So once I got done with this moss stitch here, I changed to a smaller needle and then I knit, I guess about 2.5 inches, 3 inches of just plain stockinette. Camera does not want to focus on that because the stitches are teeny tiny. And after I had knit this 2.5 or 3 inches of stockinette, I left the stitches live. I didn't bind them off, and I just went and sewed them down to the very edge of the steek. Here's my steek right here, which I also sewed down. I got really carried away with the finishing of this thing. I sewed the steek down with some sewing thread, so you're not even going to be able to see that, but there's some sewing thread in here so that it would be totally invisible and also not add any bulk whatsoever. And then here, when I sewed the facing down, I did use the same gray yarn, which didn't add a whole lot of bulk because this yarn was very thin. Then I had to figure out how I was going to finish the armholes, so I decided why not do a facing for the armholes too. You can see that this looks really similar to how I did the front facing. Again, after I was done knitting this facing, I left the stitches live and then sewed them down to the body using the gray yarn. And I was really careful when I did this to make sure that nothing was getting messed up on the right side of the fabric. So that's an area where I definitely took a lot of time. The circumference of the facing needed to be bigger in order to lie flat when it's sewn down against the body and not bunch up. So that is why I put increases down here. The thing that I don't love so much about these armhole facings is that it's really thick. Like this steek in here, there's a lot of bulk in here, and I don't love that. It's okay. I mean, I think the facing gives such a nice clean edge that I'm okay with the little bit of bulk. I guess the other solution might have been to just pick up stitches and then immediately bind off. Yeah, that might have worked, but I do like the covering of the steek. Like, I got real obsessed with that at the end of this project. It feels very cozy when it's on. I'm sure it would feel cozy no matter what, but just the fabric, body fabric on its own is actually pretty lightweight because this is just fingering weight Shetland type 2-ply yarn. So it's pretty lightweight actually, but all these folded hems add a lot of nice weight to it, and I really like the way it hangs at the bottom. So that is my Yell sweater. I have one more wardrobe change to show you my third finished object, so let me go do that. My third finished object is the Plantain Tee by DanDoh. So this is a free pattern. The size range isn't super wonderful. So it's a European company, and in centimeters, I think it goes from like an 80 centimeter to maybe 116 or so. That's not really a wide size range, but within that, there are a whole bunch of different sizes, like lots of variation within that size range. So I made the third size, which I think was 88 centimeters, and my actual bust measurement is an 89. So I have made this a whole bunch of times, and in the past I noticed this, and yet I forgot about it this time when I was going to sew this up. The neckband piece, when you cut it out, has 2 notches, and so they're meant to be notches to show you where the shoulder seams, where the neckband attaches to the shoulder seams. I find those notches to be too close together, so you like really have to stretch the neckband across the back of the neck, and then there's like hardly any stretching that happens as you're sewing the neckband onto the front. And what this results in sometimes is that the front neckline, like the front of the neckband, can sort of fall out a little bit. Like, you can see that this doesn't sit super flat against my body, and it's because of that exact issue. Like, I should be pulling the neckband a little bit tighter. So if you're making this, what I would do is just ignore the notches and divide your neckband in 4, divide your body opening in 4, and then just like attach those 4 points with pins, and then just do it that way. It's I think gonna have a better result than using the notches on the pattern piece. So here you can see how it fits. It is an A-line shape, and I don't know, I find that sort of nice. I like doing like the French tuck. I know a lot of people don't like that, but I like that. So that is probably how I would wear it. I had a really small piece of fabric when I was cutting this out, so I didn't have much choice about the placement, but as you can see, this is like, there's a big old skull, like, sort of off-center, and that looks a little bit goofy. You know, as soon as I put it on, after I had finished it, I was like, oh man. I don't know that I would have wanted it centered, but I would have wanted it more off-center. Really, this is a good tip for any pattern. If you're using a pattern fabric, you got to check out your pattern placement when you're cutting your fabric out, because otherwise you end up with a shirt that looks like this. So those are my 3 finished objects, and I'm gonna go ahead and put my Yell sweater back on because I'm cold now. My first work in progress is my Acre sweater, which I also showed on the other video. And when I last showed this, I only had a front and a back. They were not seamed together. I still need to do 2 sleeves, sew the whole thing together, and then do a neckband and cuffs and the hem. Here is what I have. Crazy, right? I have done both sleeves. I have seamed the entire thing. I have done the neckline, which looks very cool. Also, I finished the cuff on this sleeve, and I am working on the one on this sleeve, and I still have to do the hem. That's a ton of work done. I was really not anticipating that this would go so quickly. I guess it's like one of those things where if you work on a project, it actually gets done. Seems like a simple concept, and yet I just have stuff sitting around forever, and it's like, why do I have so many whips? So let me go over the yarns again that I'm using for this. So this is, the pink is my hand-dyed yarn. The mint green is Stress Knits in Succulents. It's her favorite base. And the bottom yarn is Mount Rutsen Casey in the Campfire colorway. This was my first time doing seaming in crochet. I had made maybe 1 crochet garment before, but I think it was in the round. So I don't remember doing this at all, but you seam these pieces using single crochet. Crochet seaming, for some reason, is just a lot more enjoyable than seaming knitting. I don't know what it is. It's like if you're still crocheting, like you use single crochet for the seam. So you're still crocheting, so you're still having fun, right? It's not like you have to get your tapestry needle out and be like dragging the whole long string of yarn through all of the stitches. I think that's what it is. This sweater pattern is from Pom Pom magazine, and so like a lot of magazine patterns, it doesn't have super wonderful instructions sometimes. Like, they have to fit all of the pattern into a tiny magazine, right? Like, there are page limits, and some things need to be sort of glossed over a little bit. I do think the instructions for this sweater are actually pretty good. Like, I am not an expert crocheter at all. The fact that I was able to follow this pattern means that it must be relatively well written, right? So the stitch pattern on the entire body is, it looks like rib, and it's done by working into the third loop. So when it comes time for seaming these pieces together, it says to continue working into the third loop. And so I'm not entirely sure that I did this correctly, but as I was going along, I liked the way it was looking, so I just decided to keep going and doing it the way I was already doing it, even if it wasn't like the right way. Doing the seaming whatever way I happened to be doing it resulted in these 2 rows of stitches that sort of echo the rows of this working into the third loop pattern on the body. It's a really nice detail, and I really just like how it looks. Here's an example of what it looks like on the side of the body. And then you seam the sleeves on in the same way. It's just a really neat finish. Like, neat as in orderly, you know? And I guess it's sort of neat in the, like, it's cool sort of way. I think I'm just obsessed with, like, clean finishing techniques lately, obviously. My next work in progress that I have to show is the Wednesday sweater by PetiteKnit. Last time I showed this, it was just sort of the upper body, like down to the armholes. It had no sleeves and it had no turtleneck. So here is what I was able to get done over the last month. You can see I have this absolutely super long, huge turtleneck done, and it's all in 1x1 twisted rib. So that was a joy. And then I have both sleeves done as well. Well, this one's almost done. Getting there. I got all of this done by only doing 6 rounds per day. I'm pacing myself on this mostly because, for whatever reason with this yarn at this gauge, I can tend to get a little bit of hand pain in both hands actually, but mostly my right hand. And so I have just decided that this is going to get done whenever it gets done, at the rate of me knitting 6 rounds per day. I don't do any more, I don't do any less. The gauge on this luckily is big enough that I still feel like I'm making progress at 6 rounds per day. It's still, I mean, that's over an inch of knitting each day. So that is how I was able to get the neck and both sleeves done in a relatively short amount of time, doing relatively little work on the sweater. I'm holding 2 yarns together for this project. The pink one is Fleece Worsted in the Lauren's Coral colorway, and this is definitely heavier than worsted weight. If you've never worked with Fleece before, it's really more of an Aran, like on the heavy side of Aran weight. And then I'm holding it together with this undyed yak merino silk singles yarn. And so this is just like something that I had in my dye stash from a long time ago. So I have just finished the 4th skein of this. This is the 5th skein of Fleece that I have. So my plan now is to just, once I bind this sleeve off, I'm going to go back to the body and just knit the body as long as I can. I'm hoping that it will get to be like long tunic or dress length. The original pattern also has a split hem at the bottom that's done in 1x1 twisted rib. And so my plan is still to do the split hem if it's at a good length when I get there. I'm sort of just gonna wait and make that decision at the end. So with this being number 5 out of 8 skeins that I have, I figure I'm about halfway done. My third work in progress that I have to show is the Rad Vent Throw by Ambah O'Brien. So this is meant to be like a 1-person blanket, and it is meant to be used with an advent calendar, like a yarn advent calendar with mini skeins. So it's meant to have 24 squares, but I like a little bit bigger throw blanket, so I am gonna do 30 squares. So I decided before the start of the year that I would get 6 squares done, and then every month for the first 3/4 of the year I would do 3 squares per month. The other cat, no, they're all up in it. So here are the 3 that I completed in January. This is using Stress Knits yarn. I got the Stress Knits yarn advent calendar for this past year, so these 3 are from that.
I have no idea what the colorways are because I immediately like jumbled them up as soon as I got them, so I couldn't follow what colorway was what after the month was over. I'm storing all of my squares in this plastic container that my sheets came in, just to protect them from moths, because nothing would make me more irritated than getting to, you know, month 9 or whenever I'm going to be done with these squares and finding out that moths have eaten some of it. Like, that can't happen. And I'm keeping the rest of the minis in this little cloth bin right here that I got from my local yarn store. So here is what they all look like in there. And I thought now would be as good of a time as any to pick my 3. So let me not look at them. All right, so these are going to be my 3 mini skeins for next month. All of her colors are really nice and soft. And I think that's the thing that I really love about Stress Knit's hand-dyed yarn. I'm really not super into indie dyed yarn at this point, but I really love Stress Knit's colors. They're just absolutely beautiful. So those 3 you'll see next month when I finish my squares in February. And again, I'm holding all of these mini skeins double with the same yak merino silk singles that I'm holding for my Wednesday sweater. So I guess that just leaves my upcoming plans. I have a swatch to show you, and this swatch is made with some local-ish farm yarn that I bought at the same time I got that horse fabric bin at my local yarn store, and there is basically no information about this yarn on the tag. I could tell that this was more than a worsted weight, probably more than an Aran weight. It felt like in the, you know, above Aran weight, the yarn weights are just so not standardized, but I was like, you know, this is probably considered a bulky, and it is really pretty. It's got this heathered, it's definitely dyed in the wool. It's a 2-ply. So the only information on the skein was the name of the farm, and it said it was 4 ounces, and it's 100% wool. That's it. I did a little bit of like quick mental math and figured that if I bought what they had, which was 8 skeins, that would be enough for a sweater for myself. And in my mind, I wanted to make the Ginsberg by Noragon. It's a Brooklyn tweed pattern from a few years ago, and it's basically been in my mental queue like since it came out, but I don't tend to buy bulky yarn regularly. Like, it's not something that I keep in my stash. So I would have needed to buy specifically for that project. And that's not something that I typically do. Like, I like having a lot of yarns in my stash, and then part of the fun for me is seeing what I can make with what I already have in my stash. The Ginsberg pattern is a short-sleeved cardigan that has, like, it's got a very interesting, lots of positive ease shape. It's actually very similar to how this Yell vest is fitting me. It's got some cables and also some textured panels. I'm not totally convinced about the stitch definition because there just isn't a whole lot of it in the swatch. Like, I don't need there to be a ton of stitch definition in this garment. Like, I think the original yarn is Brooklyn Tweed Corey, which, as I understand, is basically a singles yarn. Like, I think it's loosely plied, or, you know, like Lopi style. So I would think that I would get more stitch definition with applied yarn, but looking at the swatch, I'm not entirely sure. I am getting gauge exactly, so I think I'm going to go for it and see and assess as I go along. If it turns out that there's really not enough stitch definition, it's just a lot of work for absolutely nothing, I can always rip it out and make something else because I have definitely enough yarn. So I think that is all I have for January 2021. And I hope to see you next month so you can follow along with my progress, and it really helps me stay motivated to know that there are people cheering me on. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.